Numbers equal power. Spread the word about RagingElePhantsRadio.com.
Well, all right now, Saints and Patriots, you've got to be a Raging Elephants Radio evangelist. We got goals. We're not giving up here. Okay? Most of our growth has got to be organic these days. That means you've got to tell somebody about Raging Elephants Radio. You got to let them know about our uniqueness, our disruptive model. You don't think we're disruptive? Let me tell you something. There's folks shaking out there about the fact that Raging Elephants Radio is growing and has the ability to distribute the type of content from a liberty perspective the way we're able to do. They recognize it. They see us growing, and they know that their days are numbered. The whole thing, Pastor Broden, you've got to get more information to the liberty-driven electorate out there, which I believe is the majority of Texans. If they get the right information, I believe they can be trusted to cast the proper votes. What do you think, SREC member, SD23, newly elected Pastor Stephen Broden?
I think you're dead on. The failure of this republic has been that we have not been educated to what we have in the Constitution and the rights that really belong to the people. You see, the preamble to the Constitution begins, "We, the people of the United States, in order to perform a more perfect union." In other words, this Constitution that we have was an embellishment or an augmentation of the original, a more perfect union. The union there is the union of sovereign states, 13, that were sovereign states. When the Revolutionary War came to an end, 13 sovereign states constructed a constitution for each of their states. The state, as we understand it then, meant a sovereign country. Like the Great Britain was a state, France was a state, Massachusetts was a state, New York was a state. That is a sovereign nation, in order to perform a more perfect union. And they came together for the general welfare and for the common good. That's how they came together. Other than that, what goes on in Texas is for Texans. What happens in Oklahoma is for Oklahomans. And we're sovereign states, and we compete. If a liberal state wants to be blue, let them be blue. But Texas is red, and we have conservative values, and we exercise those values. Thomas Jefferson said this. He says, in order for us to maintain our liberty, an educated citizenry is a vital requisite for the survival of our liberties. And the educational system, the government schools have been dumbing us down from the fact that this country is comprised of 50 sovereign states.
And in today's vernacular, Pastor Broden, it would be accurate to say for the common folks to understand each one of those 13 states originally and now, the today's vernacular, they would be considered countries. They would look... at the founding of the United States, it looked more, as far as structure is concerned, like we have with the European Union now. They have a common currency, but they have control of their own borders. They have their own laws. They have their own governmental bodies. They make their own treaties. They have their own military forces. But for the sake of economic cooperation and for the general welfare, they pulled down some barriers and they created some loose ties. They're still countries, individual countries.
Right, we're sovereign. And that's how the Constitution of this great state begins. You open up the Constitution to the state of Texas, it begins, "We, the sovereign state of Texas." That's how the language begins. And that's who we are. And we must return to that. And we must recognize that we have only agreed to the general welfare and to the common defense. That's what we agreed to. And we framed and created the federal government. You see, the federal government is a creation of the 13 colonies. They weren't colonies, 13 sovereign states. They created the federal government and specified to it its duties. Whenever they violate those duties, the sovereign state of Texas has a right to say no to any extra constitutional actions coming from Washington, D.C. We have failed as a state to exercise our interposition to nullify unconstitutional acts. And that's a constitutional right that we have, and we must exercise that. We must exercise that right. And it is the magistrate, the lesser magistrates in the state of Texas have that duty and responsibility to do so. They will not do it until we, the people, put pressure on them to do it.
You were elected
it's
to...
our role
to
make them live up to that duty and that responsibility.
Okay, so you were elected to the SREC just this past week. In previous conversations, you had never mentioned to me that you were even contemplating fulfilling that vacant seat, and then all of a sudden, I mean, it's, a little birdie tells me Pastor Broden's going to run for SREC SD23. I'm like, what? And so I called you to verify it, and indeed, and lo and behold, you won. And on your first day, it was a historic day. The mere fact that a debate took place whether or not a non-binding referendum on Texas independence should even be on the ballot, whether it failed or it passed, the mere fact that debate took place was historic, don't you think, Pastor Broden?
Oh, absolutely. It was an incredible orientation for me. I was asked by some friends and people who are in the 23rd district to run for that spot, and they encouraged me and sort of convinced me that that was something that needed to be done, and that a conservative voice needed to be a part of that body, to be a part of the conservative contingency there. And they convinced me, and so I did it. And it was not something that I was contemplating on my own, but I was asked to by a group of friends who came and sat down and talked with me and asked me to do this, and so I agreed to do it. But it was a historic moment, and it was an incredible ride for me, and orientation as to how things work within that august body and how they deliberate. And it was sort of a hot, contentious moment there, and a lot of passion, and there was an atmosphere. I believe there was a spiritual atmosphere there.
Oh, really? Talk about that for a moment. Talk about what you were. I mean, you're sensitive to the spirit. I mean, I was watching on the video feed. I wasn't there. I mean, you and I have spoken about the spiritual battles that you and I believe are going on. I've spoken to you. I think this is Daniel all over again, if you ask me, as far as Texas is concerned. We've had those conversations. For you to say that you felt something spiritual was going on in that room.
Only it was other members as well that expressed to me that they felt a kind of spiritual oppression in there, and that because of the contention, because of the tenseness of the hour, of the moment, they just felt something, and it was clearly there. And for me, coming into it and observing it and seeing what was going on, I can tell that there was a lot of anger, there was a lot of frustration, and there was a lot of passion that was in that room. Now, let me say this. Before we went into that room, we had a time of prayer. So a group of Christians met, and I was a part of that group even before I became a member. I just sort of wanted to go in and pray. And there was a time of prayer, and before the prayer, I heard a lot of the discussion from the battle that took place on the resolution committee and on other committees during the previous day. And I heard about it, and then they were talking about it, and there was a lot of frustration and anger. And as I prayed, I prayed that they would recognize that, and some were so frustrated, Apostle, that they wanted to just leave. And I said, the founding of our nation in my prayer began with contention. That the Constitution was a battle between the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist. And they fought one another, and they argued and debated with one another. And so what's important here is that we not shrink away from the battle to persuade and to convince. We should not shrink away from that. We should engage, but engage with clear statesmanship and articulation of position. And unfortunately, from my observation, that was not the case on one side. One side was more prepared than the other, and they were able to articulate a position, although it was wrong, in my estimation. It certainly was not consistent with what we know to be true about the Constitution. But they raised their case, and they used their argumentation, and they convinced the majority to vote their way.
Talk with Pastor Stephen Broden, Raging Elephants Radio contributor and newly elected SREC member for ST23. Before you came on, Pastor Broden, I revealed to everyone we have discovered the magic potion to get everybody elected. You got to be attached to Raging Elephants Radio somehow, somewhere.
Well, I see that there's a brand new effort. I just got an email that says that the effort now on the part of the secessionists is to go into the precincts and try to get precinct chairs. And,
well, that's the key. There needs to be a pretty strong move.
That there's an effort out there to do that.
Oh, yeah. We had Daniel Miller on this program yesterday, and we were in consensus that the way to go is between now and March to make sure that the liberty-driven Texans get engaged in the structure of the party. And that means you got to go to your precinct convention on March 1, have some fun, bring some resolutions that you're serious about, that you'd like to see on the Republican Party of Texas platform. Generally, when someone goes to a precinct convention, the attendance is so poor, the number of delegates that are appointed that they usually have apportioned for that precinct, they usually never have enough delegates to fill that apportionment in most cases. And it's the same case when you go to your SD or county convention. The attendance many times is so poor that they're begging people. That's what happened in SD 7 in 2014. They were begging people to be delegates. This is a prime time to.
There's no question about it. I think there's an opportunity here.
Yeah.
And going forward, that opportunity has to be managed and strategically. I don't want to use the word manipulated, but strategically engineered.
Steered, yeah.
To produce the results that is favorable and that will give us the ultimate results that we want. And so I like the idea. It's called the Precinct Project, and it's launched. It's in action now, and I think that people need to go forward with it. You see, I'm convinced, and this may not be a popular position, that we need to use all of our constitutional rights, and we just have not done it. We have been asleep at the wheel. We've allowed the fox in the hen house, and it's been in there ripping this nation off and moving it away from its Judeo-Christian principles and to the embracement of doctrines of demons, may I say. And those demonic doctrines of socialism, communism, Marxism, Darwinism, all those isms are anti-God systems. And we have capitulated to them and allowed them to take over our nation while we were enjoying our material wealth and enjoying our football teams and basketball teams and asleep at the wheel. And these people came in targeted, focused, and specifically going after running this nation into the ground. And now that we're up, we don't know what we have in our hands with respect to our Constitution, with respect to the rights that we have that are guaranteed to us by God, those unalienable rights. We don't know. But we need to employ them. We need to exercise them and do them now. If we fail to do them, then we don't have a justification for doing anything. We must first do them. And if they don't work, then the ultimate end is the cessation. But I think before we do that, we've got to do nullification. We've got to do that. And we haven't done it. We haven't done it. I know that's not a popular position, but we need to do our constitutional duty first.
I don't have an argument with that. I don't have an argument with that. I mean, I think that is a position. I think that is a very reasonable and logical position. Let's at least try nullification first, and if it doesn't work,
then we've got justification. Then we can say we've tried it, and we're running up against these despots and these tyrants, and there's only one answer for despots and tyrants.
But the problem is, Pastor Broden, and here's the thing. When it came to the question of whether it should be on the ballot,
it should be.
Yeah, you stood up. That was. I mean, I don't know if you took votes prior to that, but as far as gravity of a vote, you stood up.
Yeah.
You know.
Sure, I think it should be, and I still think it's a bad mistake not to have it on there. I think you ought to have it on there because you can get the tone and the tenor and the temperature of where people are in this state, and that will have an impact on the decision-making in that group in particular. When they come to recognize where people are and what their thinking is, and the passion that is out there, then it changes the way we do legislation, it changes the way we do policies, it changes the whole way we approach this thing, and it will engender a response that is heretofore has not happened.
That's what
officials have not been listening to the people.
That's what I don't understand.
This was a way to get the temperature, to hear the voice of the people, to hear what they have to say.
What if, I mean, that's what I don't understand. The opponents of putting it on the ballot, so short-sighted as if this was the final vote that Texas was going to be gone on March the 2nd. No. I mean, what if it was on the ballot and it did win overwhelmingly, and just what you said is the reaction that you get from Washington and that you get from Austin? Oh, my goodness, these people are serious. We better change our ways. We had better have ourselves a conversion experience. I mean,
absolutely.
Right? I mean, it was a win-win all the way around. And if it was defeated, if the people of Texas said no, not ready, don't want to do this, think it's a bad idea, okay, the conversation is not over because Washington is going to continue to do its stupid things, its tyrannical, totalitarian directions, okay? The conversation is not going to be over just because that referendum was defeated.
Precisely.
Okay?
But what it does, it says to those who put it on the ballot, there's some work that we need to do here. Education. We need to inform people, bring them up to speed as to why this initiative was even placed here in the first place.
And one-third
were oblivious. But see, what happens is that the role of the lesser magistrate is invoked by remonstration. Remonstration is an old, antiquated word that simply means to plead your case or to protest. Who does the remonstration? The people do. The role of the people in applying the lesser magistrate doctrine is to remonstrate before the lesser magistrate and rally behind him when he takes a stand. The lesser magistrate often will not act until the people plead their case. And that's what we were trying to do. Plead the case. That there is stuff coming out of Washington, D.C. that is extra constitutional. That has gone beyond the enumerated duties specified to it by the sovereign state. They've gone beyond it. And there's a response. The response must come from the magistrate here in this state who have been sleeping at the wheel. They're lawyers, and these lawyers have been trained in these schools of law that teach them that when the Supreme Court speaks, that's the final law. It is not. It is not. They do not represent settled law. They represent an opinion. There are three branches of the government. Guess what? Which one is the weakest?
Judiciary.
What's the strongest?
Legislature.
The legislative. It's the strongest one. It's the first one that the article talks about. Because that's where the Founding Fathers wanted the power to be. And that's why they have the power of the purse. It should be with the people. The legislator represents the people, and it's gotten away from that. Completely away from that. We don't even have checks and balances anymore. And that's because the people have been asleep at the wheel. Not because we've got idiots in Washington, D.C. They're just taking advantage of the fact that we're dumbed down, don't know the Constitution, don't understand our rights, don't understand our unalienable rights, those rights given to us by God. Just here today, I think, today or was it yesterday, that Clarence Thomas spoke about this Second Amendment issue coming out of Illinois, where some city in Illinois said that they want to ban long guns, that the only guns you can buy is pistols, and they violated the Constitution. They violated not only the Constitution, they violated our unalienable rights. I have an unalienable right to protect my family and to protect my wife and my children and to protect my property. That doesn't come from the Constitution. That comes from God. The Constitution only affirms those unalienable rights. That's all the Constitution is doing in the Second Amendment, is affirming an unalienable right. But we've been asleep at the wheel. And Clarence Thomas says, well, they violated the Second Amendment of the Constitution. No, they didn't violate the Constitution. They violated God's law. And the lesser magistrate has a responsibility to interpose when there's an immoral, unjust, or impugn upon God's law.
Information, communication, action. RagingElePhantsRadio.com.
Okay, we only have a few more minutes left with Pastor Stephen Broden. Then I got to take one more break and then get out of the way here for G-Rod. I mean, I cut a lot of breaks out today because JT was on a roll, I was on a roll. You know how it is with us ultra-conservative soul brothers, Pastor Broden.
Amen. The hour is urgent.
Convention.
Yeah.
First week
all
of May.
All of us are required to come to the deck with our hands ready to go. All hands on deck.
Convention is going to be the first week of May. JT Edwards thinks it's going to be a real cage match and the true direction of the party. I mean, over the last 2 or 3 conventions, the direction of the party has been rather murky. The paradigm shift in the electorate is plain to see when you look at the number of seats that are held in both chambers of the Pink Dome. There's been a huge paradigm shift in the electorate from 2008 till the present. That paradigm shift is held. And it's starting to reflect, this paradigm shift, I believe, is starting to reflect in the composition of the delegations to these state conventions. Each convention has been more and more contentious. Last time, it was over the Texas solution, and it was very contentious. And I really believe, I kind of agree with JT, and perhaps you do too, Pastor Broden, Stephen Broden, that this convention, more than any other, is really going to plot a course for the Texas GOP by leadership elections and by SREC elections. Your thoughts, your final thoughts, Pastor Broden.
I agree. It's going to be contentious. I think the Times is demanding that this contentious environment will happen, in that the very republic itself is experiencing titanic shiftings right now, and people are waking up to the reality that things aren't like they used to be, and they're wondering what should they do about it, and they're coming to these conventions, and they're coming in with a perspective that is divine, I believe, that is back to the original intent. It's back to the Judeo-Christian principles. It's back to the values that made this nation great, and they want to see their elected officials represent those values. And they're going to run headlong into a head-on collision with the other side. And the other side is going to fight to maintain its power. So, yes, it's going to be very contentious.
That's been Pastor Stephen Broden. Pastor Broden, thanks a lot for dropping by today. Our time was kind of short today, but as a Raging Elephants Radio contributor, we've already decided that you're going to be a regular on Raging Elephants Radio. We're going to have him on a whole lot more often. His voice is one that certainly needs to be heard.